some you wouldn't like to hear, um, because I mean different things to different people. But we all have nicknames. I can remember one nickname I had growing up. Another time for that too. I just want to, as we begin, firstly, um, just to let you know that I am still battling with with the virus, so I may sound a bit nasal. And I found out this morning why I got sick. Not how, I still don't know how yet, but why. And I shared it with the elders so they would know. But I haven't been sick for a long time. But I'm winning this battle. I think I'm on the road to recovery, but I'm still very, very nasal. So I'm trusting and hoping that you're hearing me clearly what I'm seeing. I just want to say before we continue with where we left off, that when First Lady was talking about the right hand of fellowship, we want you to know it's no kind of simmy thing. It's not just a traditional thing. It's something that was started by the apostles. And we're going to be talking about the apostles tonight. And let me just quickly say in Galatians 2:9, it says, and when Paul is talking, he said, and when James, Cephas, and John, that's James, Peter, and John, who seemed to be pillars, perceived the grace that had been given to me, they gave me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship. So it was an official welcoming into the ministry. And they told them that they could go and preach to the Gentiles. So this is what we want to do on that day. We want to give you the right hand of fellowship and welcome you into this ministry. And for those of you who are here for the first time, this ministry is made up of people from many different ministries. But there are some people who do not have a particular home ministry and want to make Live Right Ministry their own. And so these are the people we are asking to come so we can give you the right hand of fellowship. So just so that you would know, it's not any kind of simmy-dimmy, any man-made kind of thing. It's a tradition that was started by the apostles, and we continue that tradition today. And talking about apostles, this is what we have been looking at. We have been looking at the 12 original apostles, and we started looking at them some time ago. In fact, we were looking at the fivefold ministry, and we looked at ministry gifts. And before that, we were looking at the subject of purpose. What is your purpose? And we said one of the things that determines your purpose is the gift that you've been given. And the gift that God has given to the church are the fivefold ministries. I told you I have it as four, but many people call it the five, separated it into five. So we'll call it the fivefold ministry. And the first one is the apostle. And we have been looking at the apostle as one who is sent out. And I'm not going to go back, into all that we did. If you missed it, then you can go into YouTube and you can pull it up and check it out. But we saw that there were 12 original apostles. We also said that the difference between an apostle and a disciple is that an apostle is one who has been sent, one who has been had a personal encounter with Jesus. Jesus taught them personally. He sent them out, and they reported back to him. Those were the original apostles. And so we also found out that there were other apostles apart from them. And we named a few: Paul and Silas and Barnabas and James, who was Jesus' brother. We saw them as being apostles. What we want to do today, before we move on from apostles, I want to share with you, I did some research into the original apostles, and it will be interesting for us to look at them because, as we have said, many people today call themselves apostles. And whether they are or not, I guess only time will tell, or God will judge them, because we saw that they are false apostles. But it will be interesting for us to go back and look at the original 12 and see, for those of us who call ourselves apostles, and when I say us, I don't mean me, I'm not an apostle, Some of you here could be apostles. God has given the gift apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers. Some of you here may be budding apostles or apostles who have been called, but you're now coming into your ministry. So it's interesting, it would be interesting to look at the original 12 and get to understand them. Now, one of the things I want you to keep in mind, two things. One, this information that I'm going to share with you, you're not going to find in scripture. You're not going to find it in the Bible. It doesn't mean that we're adding to scripture. It means that sometimes you have to go outside of the Bible to get some historical data, historical information. What I'm sharing with you does not take away in any way from the 12. It doesn't. In fact, it gives us a greater understanding. But this really, what I'm sharing with you has been handed down by tradition, by information that has been researched by people. And so let's take a look at the 12 apostles. The second thing is that one of the things that I have always thought, when I thought about the 12 disciples or the 12 apostles, these 12 fellas who came together and did everything together and they got along well and they were just in sync with each other. And that may not necessarily be the truth. But let's look at it and see. The first apostle that was called, the first one that Jesus called was Andrew. Andrew, according to tradition, as I said, it's tradition I'm giving you here now, was born in Capernaum. He was the oldest child of a family of 5. He had a brother named Simon, and they had 3 sisters. So it was Andrew, Simon, and 3 girls. His father was a partner with Zebedee in the fish business in Bethsaida. When he became an apostle, he was not married, but he lived with his brother Simon, Peter. So he was not married. And so they were also fishermen, Andrew and Peter, and they had James and John as their partners. James and John were sons of Zebedee. When he became an apostle, he was 33 years old. In fact, he was older than Jesus by a whole year, and he was the oldest of all the apostles. It is said that after Pentecost, Peter became famous. Peter was the one everybody was talking about because Peter is the one who got up and spoke. But it is said Andrew never felt intimidated by the fact that he was always introduced as Simon Peter's brother. And when persecution started, that's after Jesus left, he went through Asia and Macedonia, and he was winning souls for the kingdom. And then he was finally apprehended, and he was crucified, Andrew. And it is said, tradition says, it took 2 whole days for Andrew to die on the cross. 2 whole days when he was crucified. And even during that time, he was still preaching even while he was on the cross. That's the story of the first apostle, Andrew, the older brother of Peter. He was the first one. The second apostle was Peter. Most of us know about Peter. In fact, his name was Simon. And when he joined the apostles, when he was called by Jesus, he was 30 years of age. He was married and had 3 children and lived in Bethsaida. Now, it is said that Jesus knew Simon even before he called him. So he was known to Jesus before. So when Jesus told him, come follow me, it was not just a stranger that passed and said, come follow me. They knew each other. Now, Simon was, according to his friends, an erratic and impulsive person. He was always getting into trouble, always getting into difficulties because he used to talk a lot. And they say he used to speak without thinking. But he was a natural leader. He was an inspirational leader. He was a quick thinker, although he wasn't a deep thinker, but he was a quick thinker. And he used to ask many questions. Even while they were apostles, he asked the most questions. In fact, it is said he asked more questions of Jesus than all the other apostles put together. But he was a man of quick decision and sudden action. Like the time when they were in the boat and they saw Jesus walking on the water, he's the one who said, Jesus says, if it's you, let me come to you. And Jesus says, come. And he was the first out of the boat. That's the kind of person he was. Even another time when Jesus came, he jumped off the boat and he swam to the shore to meet Jesus. His great strength, Peter's strength, was his loyalty and his friendship. And he was the first of the apostles to make a confession of Jesus, his divinity and his humanity. He said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Peter was the most outstanding preacher of the 12 of them. He did more than all the others, with perhaps the exception of Paul, to establish the kingdom of God and to send out the ministry. That was Peter. His wife, the scripture just mentions his wife, but it is said that his wife was a member of the women's arm of the ministry, if you want to put it that way, because women followed Jesus too. And when Peter was driven out of Jerusalem, she went with him wherever he went. She was part of the ministry. All the journey to all the different churches and all the missionary excursion, she was there. And when Peter was crucified, it is said that she was thrown to the wild beasts in the arena. They had this arena where Christians were thrown in there with lions and things, and they were eaten. She was one who was thrown in there, Peter's wife. Peter himself was killed by Emperor Nero in 64 AD. There was a great fire in Rome. And Nero accused the Christians of starting the fire. In fact, he's the one who started it. But he wanted an occasion to kill the Christians. So Peter was killed by Nero. He was hung on a cross. And it is said that he considered it an honor to be crucified like Jesus. But he didn't want to be crucified the same way Jesus was crucified. So he was crucified upside down. Because he didn't think that even though it was an honor for him to be crucified, he didn't feel honorable enough to be crucified the same way Jesus was crucified. So he was crucified at his request upside down. That's Peter. So we have Andrew and Peter, his younger brother. Then there's James, the third of the apostles. He had a brother, his brother was John, and he was the older one. And he had his brother, Jesus called them Boanerges, sons of thunder. James was 30 years old when he became a follower of Jesus Christ. It is said that he was married, he had 4 children, and he lived near his parents in the outskirts of Capernaum, which is in Bethsaida. He too was a fisherman, as I told you. He and his younger brother John, together with Andrew and Simon Peter. Now, James and his brother John, they knew Jesus longer than any of the other disciples. So again, Jesus was not a stranger to them. It was not a stranger just passing by and say, come follow me. They knew him. It is said that James possessed 2 natures. He had a fiery temper. Again, as I told you, this is tradition. He had a fiery temper. And when he would, so he would lash out. and speak out. And when he cooled down, he would say that it's righteous indignation. He was just anger, his anger was for the Lord. That was James. They say apart from Peter, he was the best public speaker, James. But they said the other side of James is that he would be quiet. Apart from his outbursts, another day he would be very quiet. So one day he'd be quiet, next day there would be an outburst. And they said he was a very, very good storyteller. So he used to tell stories. They said he used to talk freely with Jesus. And then another time he'd be very silent for days at a time. They said after Jesus left, after Jesus trained all 12 of them, he had acquired, listen to this, a superior concept of Jesus' message more than the other 12. In other words, he understood Jesus even more than the other 11, I should say. But because of his fiery temper, he's the one who wanted Jesus to call down fire. That's why Jesus called them sons of thunder. He wanted Jesus to call down fire from heaven to destroy the Samaritans because they showed disrespect to Jesus. They say he was a well-balanced planner and a thinker. He was level-headed. They said he was a vigorous individual, but he was never in a hurry. And James was the first apostle to be killed. Stephen was the first martyr, but James was the first of the apostles to be killed. And he was killed by Herod Agrippa because Herod was afraid of him. You know, it is said, and let me just mention, he was killed by Herod Agrippa. He was actually beheaded. It is said, again, tradition, they said when the end came and he was about to die, they said he did it with such grace and poise and what else can I say? Fortitude, that one person who was there at his execution was so touched that he went away and became a disciple of Jesus. I'm sharing with you the tradition of the 12 apostles. John, the younger brother, he was 24 years old when he became an apostle, and he was the youngest. He was unmarried, and he lived with his parents. He was a fisherman, as I told you, with his brother James and Andrew and Peter. And he was the personal agent of Jesus in dealing with Jesus' family. And even after Jesus' death, remember Jesus was on the cross, he said, woman, there's your son, son, there's your mother. Because he was accustomed to Jesus' family, he's the one who used to say about them for whatever reason. So he was the one who was in charge. Now, let me just tell you, according to this tradition, these 12 people were structured. It wasn't just 12 people following Jesus. They all had responsibilities, and this was John's responsibility. Anything to do with Jesus' family, John was the one to do it. And Peter, James, and John were assigned as personal aides to Jesus. And just to let you know that Andrew, which was the first one, he was appointed as the director of the group, the one who would organize everything. That was Andrew. And Andrew was the one who appointed James and John, Peter, James, and John. They said Andrew wanted to be one of the inner circle, but because of his responsibility, he couldn't do that. So that's why he gave it to Peter, James, and John. So John himself, as we're talking about now, he wrote the Gospel of John. And what is so interesting is that he is the one who referred to himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved. Nobody else referred to Jesus, to him as that. He is the one. They said that John appreciated Jesus' love and his unselfishness. That was John. That's what he appreciated about Jesus. And that made such an impression on him that most of it, if you notice most of John's writing, he talk about love. Look at the book of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. It's all about love. He was called the apostle of love. And it is said that John, he was cool, he was daring, he was courageous. And he was one of the apostles who followed Jesus. Remember, Peter denied him? John was right there along with him when they arrested him. And they were following, he and the mother, they were following closely behind. So they didn't run away. He didn't run away. And he was there when Jesus was on the cross. That's when Jesus told him to take care of his mother. John, they say he was in prison several times. He was one who was not martyred. He was not killed. But something interesting happened to him. I'm sure you've heard the tradition that he was thrown in a barrel of oil, boiling oil, and nothing happened to him. He was not killed. He was not martyred like the others, but he was banished to an island, the island of Patmos. And that's where he wrote the book of Revelation. That's John. Can't tell you everything, but I'm just giving you as much as I can because I think it's important for us to understand the apostles. And it makes you wonder, those who are apostles today, as they look back at these apostles and what they went through, would they be willing, would one of them be willing to have gone through what the original apostles would have gone through? Philip, he was the 5th apostle to be chosen and called by Jesus. He lived in Bethsaida, and he had known Jesus for a while too. According to tradition, he didn't really know Jesus to be a great man until the day Jesus told him, "Follow me." And what influenced him was the fact that Andrew, Peter, James, and John had already started following Jesus, and that's what caused him. He was 27 years of age when he joined. And he was recently married at the time, but he had no children. Now, when they organized everything, he was the steward. He was supposed to look after certain things. He was to look after the supplies, the provision, the food. And they say he did it well. He was methodical. He was thorough. He was mathematical. He was systematic. He was organized. That's the kind of person that he was. He came from a family of 7, 3 boys and 4 girls, and he was the second one. And his family were fishermen as well. But he did everything well. And that's the thing about him. And they always had food. They always had the things that they needed because of the fact that he was such a good organizer. But they said he used to ask some again, this is tradition, he used to ask some foolish questions when they were together. But they said that Jesus tolerated his foolish question. And the reason why it is said that Jesus tolerated the question is because sometimes we have to understand that there are people from all walks of life, and not everybody will get it right away. And you have to be patient with people and answer the question. And that was Philip. He wasn't a good public speaker, but he was a very hard worker. He was not easily discouraged. And the greatest thing about him is that he had the ability to say, "Come." And when I say come, he might not agree with all that was said, and he might not have agreed with the decision, but I said he was the first who would say, "Yes, let's do it. Let's go. Come, let's go." And his great thing was, "Come see a man." Like the lady who said it, "Come see a man." That was his what should I say? His way of winning people. They said his wife was a fearless woman, and when he was crucified, she stood up in front of the cross, and she was just speaking and encouraging him until he died. Nathaniel, I hope I have time to finish all. Nathaniel, also called Bartholomew, he was the sixth, and he was the last of the apostles that was actually chosen by Jesus. And he was brought to Jesus by his friend Philip, that same Philip. And he was actually on his way to see John the Baptist when they encountered Jesus. And he was 25 years old, and he was next to the youngest. John was the youngest. He was unmarried, and, you know, he was from a family of 7, and he was unmarried. And his brothers and sisters were either married or deceased, but none of them lived around there. And Nathaniel and Judas Iscariot were the 2 most educated of all the apostles. They said he became a merchant. And he used to question, and they said his weakness was his pride. He used to question everything. As a matter of fact, he was the one who said, can anything good come out of Nazareth? Because as far as he was concerned, people from Nazareth, you know, it's like looking at somebody from one of the depressed area, the Beetham or one of them places. Can anything good come out of there? He was that kind of person. But when he met Jesus, that began to change. And this was something that they noticed about him. The apostle, in fact, he was well loved and respected by all the other apostles. He was beheaded. In fact, they said he was flayed and beheaded. What is flayed? They said he was skinned alive and beheaded. And they said they did that to him because he converted the king, somewhere in India, to Christianity. And they skinned him alive. I can't even begin to imagine something like that. Let's see if you could get through at least one other. Matthew was the 7th apostle. And they say Matthew was chosen to be a follower of Jesus by Andrew. In other words, Andrew witnessed to him, and Matthew came. His family were tax collectors or publicans. And he was a tax collector. He was 31 years old. He was married. He had 4 children. He was a good businessman, he mixed socially with people. And he was appointed by Andrew as the financial representative of the apostle. He was supposed to find money. He was also like the public relations officer. And I said he was a good judge of human nature. He was one of those who he believed in the mission of Jesus. And his other apostles, the other apostles, referred to him as the money getter. He was the one who would get money for them. But the thing about Matthew is this. Matthew, the publicans, tax collectors in those days, were not they were not liked at all by people because they used to rob the people. And they used to make a lot of money. They were rich. So Matthew had money. And it is said that a lot of the money that they used in the ministry came from Matthew. And the thing is, the other apostles did not know. They just knew that he used to get money for the ministry. But they said that a lot of his personal money is what he used for the ministry. The only other person that knew that was Jesus. And what else can I tell you about Matthew? Matthew died a very painful death. He was stoned to death. And that's another, could you imagine being stoned to death? Could you imagine that? How many people would say, I want to be apostle, if you knew that the possibility was that you'd be stoned to death? Let me just give you one more because we run out of time. Thomas, also called Didymus, and he was chosen by Philip. You know, he was the one who became known as Doubting Thomas. He had a logical, skeptical mind. So, you couldn't just present anything to Thomas. He had to have evidence. He was 29 years old when he became an apostle. He was married and he had 4 children. He was a carpenter before and a mason. And in fact, he was a carpenter, a mason, and a fisherman. He had little education. He didn't have much education, but he had a keen reasoning mind. He would be able to analyze things. In fact, they said he had the most analytical mind of the 12. They said his parents were not happily married at all, and that affected Thomas. He had a quarrelsome disposition. He used to quarrel a lot. And they said his wife was glad when he became an apostle to get him out of the house. But he was a very suspicious person, and it was very difficult to get along with him among the group of 12. But the thing is, they said the more they got to know him, the more they liked him. And then finally they accepted him because they found him to be honest and loyal. He was sincere, he was truthful. And his analytical mind, they said, was his greatest strength. His weakness was his suspicion and his doubting. You had to bring evidence to Thomas. And that is why when Jesus was raised and he wasn't there, he said, I have to see. I have to put my hands in his hand. I have to put my hands in his side. I have to see myself. I am not going to believe until I see. And that was his weakness. And so Thomas, how did he die? He was speared to death. He was killed with a spear. But they said he was speared to death. So I get the impression that it's not just one spear. Like somebody who was stoned to death, it's not just one stone. Thomas was speared to death. And one of the things he did before he died is that he was preaching and he was baptizing people until the Romans, they arrested him and they killed him. Right? I'm going to stop here tonight and we're going to continue tomorrow. But I hope you understand why I am sharing this. Because a need for us to get to understand, being an apostle has become to be so prestigious. But these guys went through a lot. These guys lost their life for who they believed in. And they knew because one after one, they were, each one after the other were killed. There's no record of them running away. There's no record of them denying, like how Peter had denied Jesus. There's no record of them saying, well, I don't know him. They all continued, after Jesus left, they all continued spreading the gospel because they were sent. And all of them met, with the exception of John, were killed for what they believed. Are we ready to face death for what we believe? Are we? Are you? I'm not saying it's going to happen, but are you? Are we? Am I prepared? I have to ask myself that question. Am I prepared to give my life for the one who I call my Savior and my Lord? That's the question I pose to you tonight. We're going to continue tomorrow, God's willing. We're going to finish off this and we're going to move on to something else. But I want you to understand. We are moving into times, in fact, we're already in the end time, and life is going to become much more difficult. And it may come to a place where we have to say yes to life or yes to Jesus. I want to live, so I'll deny Christ. or I proclaim Jesus and I lose my life. It may come to that. These guys knew it, and they lived their life, and they gave their life for the sake of the ministry. Are we ready to do that? God bless you. We're going to continue tomorrow night, God's willing.